Former Prime Minister Sir Geoffrey Palmer has dedicated much of his life to New Zealand's democracy. But now, with authoritarianism on the rise around the world, he says New Zealand needs to act in order to strengthen our form of government and society. Sir Geoffrey's new book is How to Save Democracy. I sat down with him in Wellington's old government buildings.
Tanakwe, and thank you for coming all the way from Auckland to talk to me.
I want to begin with a quote from the book. Bad times seem to be afflicting the world again as they were in the 1930s. So how do you compare that time with what we are experiencing globally today?
Well, when I was a student at the University of Chicago Law School, I had a class from Hannah Arendt, who is an expert in what I would call dictatorship and autocracy. And she wrote a book called The Human Condition, saying that everyone had a moral duty, because humans were rational, that they should try and make the world a better place. And she, of course, had to go to the United States because of Hitler's Germany. And in many ways, we're back to something like that when fascism, Mussolini and Hitler came to Europe. We got autocracy and we got fascism. Now, we're not in that state yet, but you've got to be very careful that you make democracy robust. And democracy around the world is under challenge almost everywhere. The Cambridge University did a wonderful study saying that democracy is disappearing. There are fewer democracies now than there used to be. The rules-based system of international law is now dead. New Zealand has relied on that always, and now it's in a state of collapse. If you've got a permanent member of the Security Council invading Ukraine, it's outrageous. And my whole conviction in writing this book was to ensure that New Zealand's democracy was made as robust as it could be, so that it could withstand these terrible international tendencies that have come upon us.
It's your contention that increasingly people in developed democracies are dissatisfied with democracy.
That's true. There's plenty of evidence of that. And decay and rot set in democracies. And if it's not addressed, then it gets worse. And that's what allows populism to take over and authoritarianism to flourish. And I don't think that will happen here. But I have, there's a very good book, it's now just in its second edition, I contributed to it, about the crisis in democracies. It's an international book in its second edition. And all around the world where you've got democracies, they're all suffering this sort of criticism. And we're not alone, and we're actually not in bad shape compared with most of them, but I wouldn't want us to get into bad shape.
So why do you think people are dissatisfied with democracy?
Well, because I think when their standard of living falls and they find economic hardship comes upon them, they've got to find someone to blame, and they think the government's responsible. And it's very difficult for governments to keep the economy in a state of prosperity all the time. The economic cycles come and go. And so, you know, impatience is a real problem.
So you say that the erosion of democracy is not just a problem internationally, that we are experiencing it here in New Zealand. One of your central criticisms is the erosion of parliamentary processes. So successive governments have increased the use of urgency in passing legislation. Urgency has been used by this government a lot, not only to repeal laws passed under the previous government, but also to pass new legislation. So what do you make of the use of urgency?
I think urgency is when you take urgency, you're taking away the ordinary processes that are laid down in the standing orders for processing legislation. And if you want to process a great deal of legislation, the Parliament's not sitting enough to deal with it. The Auditor-General a few years ago criticised the government for producing too much legislation, and Parliamentary Council didn't have time to draft it properly. It's a highly skilled job, drafting legislation. And so if you force stuff through the Parliament and you want to do it at speed every 100 days, you're going to have a serious set of problems. And the problems you're going to have is that you will need to use urgency a lot. And urgency isn't a one-party problem. All governments have used urgency, and most of them have used too much of it, too much of the time, because it abridges the democratic checks and balances that ensure that legislation is properly considered and consulted with by the public. Now, you come to the select committee system. We have got 123 MPs. We have got cabinet of an executive branch of 30 people. We've got 20 ministers in cabinet. We've got 8 ministers outside cabinet. We've got undersecretaries. We've got a pretty heavy executive. I've characterised New Zealand as being an executive dictatorship. It's been that way always because the number of MPs we have is quite small. If you look at international comparisons, you will find that the Ireland has 33,000 has 33,000 people produce one MP. New Zealand 43,000. In all the Scandinavian countries, it's less than here. And I have to say something that will be very unpopular. MPs are grossly overworked. It is a very big system of government we have. To keep it properly working, you have to have accountability. In the United Kingdom, the House of Commons has 650 members. And I was lucky enough when I was younger, when I was Deputy Leader of the Opposition, to be given a scholarship to go to the House of Commons, and I studied it for 2 weeks. And what I found was that the government and opposition were equally critical of the government's proposals. There was real accountability. In a parliament that size, the executive is truly accountable. In a parliament of our size, the executive's in charge, and everyone wants to be a member of the executive, and they don't really want to question their own side. And that's the difference in a small parliament. So I know it's unpopular. The public don't like, they don't like politicians, but the trouble is the parliament is going down in public estimation, and the reason it's going down is that people don't trust it. And if you don't have authentic democracy in your institutions and people don't trust it, you're on the road to perdition. And we don't want that here. I don't think we're there or anything like it, but I do think you've got to take precautions before it happens, because democracy is a very fragile form of government. It slips and slides away without people noticing. And if you look at our select committee systems, I've been going to select committees lately, you get 5 minutes. I wrote 28 pages and got 5 minutes. Now, that's, I've just made a massive submission to the Standing Orders Committee about what they can do to ensure that the select committee system actually scrutinise. People don't understand the Cabinet is not in charge of everything, the Parliament is in charge of everything. And the Cabinet ought not to be sort of telling the select committees what to do.
So if you look at that select committee process, I mean, so many submissions are now put through special interest groups who do copy and paste jobs, yes, or maybe use AI to help, yes, draft their things. Like, as you mentioned, questioning is often pretty shallow in the select committee process. And I think parties of all sides of the political spectrum often either support or oppose legislation by referencing the percentage of submissions which either support or oppose, yes, the proposition. I agree with and use that as a sort of proxy for, yes, for public support. So what would you recommend changing in that select committee process? I think
you've got to get to the substance. Scrutiny is about what is being proposed, what are the arguments in favour of it, what are the arguments against it, and often they're quite complex and intricate, and you can't handle them in 5 minutes. I remember as a backbench MP when I first got to Parliament cross-examining one witness for an hour about the National Development Bill. Now, you can't do that now. You would never, there's no time because there's too much legislation. We've got hyperlexis in this country. We pass far too much law far too quickly, and the question is, how much of it do you need?
But if people are dissatisfied with democracies, or increasingly dissatisfied with democracies, will slowing down the process make them any less dissatisfied?
Well, it will if you get better policy. The problem is that too much of the policy is not done in depth. If you want to have a proper policy, we used to have royal commissions, or the Law Commission reports, things that are researched in depth, properly analysed, thought through, consulted with by the public, and then you know where you are. But we haven't got the patience for that now, and you will not get good policy unless you do really good research and you have thought about it. And I always think Lord Rutherford had it right about New Zealand. I went to Nelson College and we had all these report cards in the glass case and in the front of the college, and he was topping everything. And when he was at Canterbury College, he said, well, in New Zealand we don't have much money, so we have to think. Well, that'd be a good start.
So what other reforms would you advocate for in the select committee space? Obviously, you'd like to see more robust questioning of submitters, but are there things that you would change when it comes to those mass copy and paste submissions?
Yes, I think you've got to get rid of them. You've got to have them. You've got to make some standing orders to allow them to be gathered, but then you've got to have a process for selecting the important ones that can make a difference and having a proper process. And I would put that process into the Legislative Council chamber, which is unused because we don't have an upper house, but you could use some of the techniques of an upper house by getting important bills heard there with enhanced select committees and have plenty of people from the public and everyone covering it. But you see, we've got a whole lot of subject select committees and the bills go everywhere. No one knows what's going on. The media is dead because the newsrooms have been completely taken away. And so no one knows what's going on. And that's a real problem for the system because the communications between the system and the public has broken down. And the Parliament has to make itself better at using the techniques of deliberative democracy. I've suggested in the standing orders thing that I've done is that it would be good if the clerk's office could have some little proper use the techniques of these committees that you set up, randomly selected, to find out what people really think about policy, because the pressure groups don't represent the general public. And with all the modern techniques that we have of using social media and everything, if you had citizens' assemblies, small ones, and really probed them about what was going on, and the clerk's office could make them available to the select committee, you would have much better scrutiny than you're getting.
It occurs to me that there are two quite distinct and broad components to modern politics. So there's the governing side, the drafting, the scrutinising, the legislating side of modern politics. But then there is also the politics side. Yep. And that's the messaging, that's the public facing, that's the social media, the communications. And there is a good reason that so many speeches in the House today seem to favour interaction with voters through that second path, right? So many speeches in the House are designed for social media rather than real scrutiny.
Well, so many of the speeches in the House are attenuated. I watched the debate it was a bill about the Electoral Law Amendment. They didn't take the time. Some of them spoke for 2 or 3 minutes. The question on an introductory bill is it suitable for introduction? You take 2 minutes? No, you can't do that. They're under strain. These people are overworked. They don't have time to read. They've got all these pressures that all the social media and the electorates bring on them. Let me just tell you, being an MP is not easy. It's a very, very high anxiety position. You've got so many demands on you, so much you have to read. People are drastically overworked. And the public don't understand the pressure the MPs are under. And if you've ever been there, you realise that it's an exhausting occupation.
So you note in the book, quote, for MPs, more political rewards tend to come from posturing than from doing the hard grind of legislating.
Yes.
And that's my point, I suppose. Like
yes.
if the incentives for MPs at the moment are to prioritise not the legislating side of things, but the public-facing, social media, communication side of things, then What incentive do they have to change the process?
Well, the problem is that you've got to look at the classical functions of the Parliament. They are two. One, make law. Two, do taxation and manage the public finances. And none of that will be helped unless you get down to bedrock on it.
But the MPs themselves, their incentives are to be re-elected, to remain in power, and they might see that actually that different path, the public-facing branding and communications, is better for them. That actually the public is more focused on that than they are on the legislating or management of public finances.
Well, I think in final analysis in a general election campaign where there are various competing views being expressed, unless substance has been delivered, there will be public dissatisfaction. And I think that you've got to be careful about not neglecting substance. I mean, how the public finances are organised, we've got a better system for doing that we used to have, but our legislative system has not been improved in the same way, and it should be. And they're reviewing the standing orders, and that's important. But just remember what the classical functions of the Parliament are, and social media isn't one of them.
Thank goodness. The government has just passed the gang patch ban into law, despite the Attorney-General's advice that it was inconsistent with the Bill of Rights. Obviously, you have wanted to entrench the Bill of Rights for some time now. But most of the public, frankly, doesn't care that this piece of legislation is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights in the view of the Attorney-General. So when it comes to strengthening the processes and scrutiny in order to strengthen democracy, what is the public's role in all of this? The
public's role is to form judgments and vote. And to participate in the system if they can, because they've got a duty as citizens. I would like to make voting in elections compulsory as they do in Australia, because they get 10% more vote going to the election there than we do. And people do have in a democracy a duty to it. The legitimacy of a government depends to a large extent on the support that it has in the electorate. And so I just think that we need to be very careful where we're going. And I agree with what you say about the noise all around the system. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So the Electoral Amendment Bill, which I think you submitted on and were questioned about for 5 minutes, has passed its first reading. So it would ban enrolment during the advanced voting period and on election day itself. It would disqualify all prisoners from voting. It would slightly change the threshold for anonymous political donations as well. What do you make of the bill?
I thought that it potentially disenfranchised quite a large number of people who actually enrolled late in the last two elections, and you could enrol right up to the time of the election. And I think a lot of those people won't do that, and you'll lose legitimacy that way. And I think it could have been done better. There are things in that bill I agree with, but I don't think it's a good idea to shut out people who want to vote. And I think you can use modern technology to ensure that that doesn't happen.
You were very critical of the Treaty Principles Bill process, but do you see value in a process by which the public, rather than the courts, can define the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi?
I do. I think that, again, we come back to deliberative democracy. If we set up citizens' assemblies, several of them, about the treaty, we could find out what they really think. Just remember, we had the biggest demonstration in the history of New Zealand about that bill, and it was divisive. You don't want to make the treaty a polarising thing. And I'm sure Mr. Seymour has learnt from that experience. It is actually possible to find common ground here. And that's what you have to do in a democracy. You must avoid polarisation. You must get social cohesion. In a small country like this, if you lose social cohesion, then you're going to have government in a very difficult situation.
See, isn't polarisation in some respects good for the so-called minor parties in Parliament? Be it David Seymour's Act, or be it Te Pāti Māori as well?
There may be political incentives to polarise. I agree that that's possible, but it's unsound to do it. And you know, in the end, peace is better than war. And the Westminster system is a very, very adversarial system of government. And that is not to be encouraged. In a small nation like us, we really need to have a quite wide measure of agreement about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, because we've got a bit of a pattern now. When one party gets in, they repeal everything that the last lot did, and then you start again. If that goes on repeatedly, you're never going to get anywhere except go in a circle.
Mm. For decades, you've advocated for New Zealand to adopt a written constitution. If we did have a codified constitution, in terms of government accountability, what do you think would be different today?
I think it would be different that everyone would know what the rules are. At the moment, we're ruled by constitutional conventions, which are customs. They're not legally enforceable in the courts. And sometimes they're followed and sometimes they're not. And I'm not advocating at this moment a written constitution because I think it's not going to happen. But what I am advocating is an effort to repair our democracy in ways that it is not vulnerable to populist takeover by authoritarian people who will produce autocracy.
Why do you think a written constitution isn't possible?
Because you'd have to go through an enormous amount of effort to get it up. And if you couldn't get widespread consensus on it, you wouldn't really be allowed to pass it, I don't think, because it wouldn't have legitimacy. It must have legitimacy. And Andrew Butler and I wrote 2 books about this, and we went all around the country, and in the South Island, 3 people said, oh, well, it doesn't matter because if the Governor-General doesn't like the bill, she doesn't have to sign it. Well, that's not right. You know, there's widespread ignorance about our system. That's why I say civics first.
The bicentenary of the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is 15 years from now. Can you give us a best case and a worst case scenario for how you see New Zealand democracy in 2040?
Well, the best case scenario is that the lion lies down with the lamb, we be reasonable about it, we avoid polarisation, and we have a peaceful country that is determined to be democratic. The worst case scenario is that we have division and unhappiness and continual confusion.
Finally, your wife says you should retire. I'm not saying anything, but what do you say when she says that? How do you reply?
Well, I would if I didn't think so strongly about some of these things. And I do think I've been writing too many books for too long, and I should stop, but I don't know whether I can.
Those select committees won't submit to themselves, you know?
No.
That is Sir Geoffrey Palmer. There's a bit more of our conversation on YouTube. And his new book is How to Save Democracy in Aotearoa, New Zealand. After the break on Q&A, as our government opens the door to foreign buyers, Nauru is going a whole lot further. We meet the man in charge of selling Nauru citizenship.